I am the universe observing itself because my consciousness was in this sea of white scintillating light that was coming out of me. I am both the source and the observer of this thing. What I am is love, joy, and peace, which is, wow. I thought I was a human being, a machine, which is not true. I mean, our cells are quantum and classical. I'm a field, I'm not the body. The self is much vaster than the ego, which is what we normally think we are. When we awake, like in my first awakening experience that I described earlier, once you make a connection with your vaster self, then the information exchange between the ego and the vaster self increases dramatically, and it comes in the form of other extraordinary experiences of consciousness, in more intuitions, and so on.
What happens when one of the greatest technological minds of the 20th century, the inventor of the microprocessor itself, has a mystical experience so profound that it shatters his belief in material reality? Well, one night in 1990, Federico Faggin, a physicist, engineer, and Silicon Valley pioneer, experienced something just that life-altering. He found himself bathed in a mystical light that seemed to dissolve the boundary between self and cosmos. And in that moment, he intuitively deep down knew something that all of his technical knowledge had never taught him, that he was not his body. That consciousness is not a product of the brain, it is the very ground of reality. And since then, Faggin has been obsessed with not building faster computers, but exploring the very architecture of consciousness and reality itself. He's developed a philosophical model in which each of us is not a biological machine, but what he calls a satiety, a sovereign spark of the one, evolving through meaning, creativity, and direct knowing. He's proposing that deep down, we are like a wave in the ocean of universal consciousness. In this one, we dive into this vision where quantum physics hints at a deeper dimension of being, where free will is real, and where the physical world is only a shadow cast by something more real and luminous. And with that, my friends, all the links that you will need for Federico Faggin and Third Eye Drops are in the description. If you'd be so kind, do like, subscribe, comment, etc. I would greatly appreciate it. Do look up and sub to Third Eye Drops wherever you listen to audio podcasts. We've got a rotund back catalog of audio-only mind melds with some truly brilliant beings. And I invite you to initiate yourself into our YouTube members patron-only Wonder Lodge, where we have a growing library of member-only content. And by the way, if you join up on Patreon, you'll also get access to a patron-only Discord server, monthly Zoom hangs, stickers, pins, shirts, and more, depending on your initiation level. And with that, my friends, let's meld minds with the truly brilliant Federico Faggin. It's really, really lovely to have you back on the show, Federico. To me, you're one of the most important thinkers right now in terms of my philosophical disposition of this whole I think it's like some new emerging consciousness first philosophical milieu where there are important differences between a lot of these major thinkers, yourself, Donald Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup, but there's this underlying exciting unity, I think, too, that has just really reinvigorated me philosophically. So first of all, publicly, I want to thank you for that.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I'm glad to be in the crowd of the people that are thinking deeply about this subject.
Yeah, and obviously you are in so many ways. But one of the other things that I really appreciate about you is that a lot of this was precipitated by a transformational, I think what we could call, mystical, non-dual experience. You've told this story many, many times, but I think it's such an important story and such an important example of how sometimes the most profound kinds of knowledge are not like technical knowledge, right? They're like these anamnesis moments, these rememberings of a deeper truth than you can possibly ever convey with words or mathematics or any kind of theory. Yet on the other side of that, you have no choice but to try to like reduce those things back down to a theory, into language, into mathematics. And you've done all of that. So I guess let's start with that experience again, if you don't mind telling that story for the millionth time.
Yeah. As a way of a background, um, I had we are in the late 80s. At that time, I was trying to understand consciousness. I had sort of discovered for myself, I mean, not discover consciousness, but discover for myself the issue of consciousness, because I was trying to understand neural networks, studying neuroscience, reading books of biology and so on. And it occurred to me that we do not recognize things by electrical signals or biochemical signals. We recognize things because we feel, we have experiences, and so that's what consciousness does. And 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 it dawned on me that it was impossible to transform electrical signals and biochemical signals into experience, what later philosophers call qualia. In other words,
Yeah.
the experience is something that goes beyond electrical signals in the brain. And that, at that time I was trying to understand, could I make a robot or something, some computational structure that could show consciousness, that could have feelings. And that was impossible. And I also was not happy in those days, and I wanted to understand the source of my unhappiness. And unhappiness or happiness are phenomena of consciousness, not
Right.
electrical signals in the brain. So, at least not for me. And and it was in that climate of searching or wanting to know, having already accepted that I had full responsibility for whatever happens in my life, and that's I consider today. I consider that an essential precondition to be able to have such experiences. You have to accept that you are responsible for what happens to your life. Otherwise, you always will look for causes outside of yourself. So I was unhappy. So I said, well, I want to find out why I am unhappy. I caused that to myself. So let's find out. And so with that preliminary, then one night in 1990, during the Christmas holidays, I was in Tahoe skiing with the family. And one night I woke up midnight or so, and I was thirsty, and I got to the kitchen, got a glass of water, went back to bed. And while I was just waiting normally with thinking nothing, to fall back asleep, a beam of energy came out of my chest, and it was physical. It was not a thought. It was not an image. It was a physical thing, and it was love. And it was perceived as a white scintillating light. It was love, it was peace, and it was joy, all mixed together. And the peace was actually the most astounding thing, because I never felt peace. Peace was simply the fact that my consciousness was in this energy, and I finally recognized myself in this energy, which is love, joy, and peace. So I am this, I am this thing that comes out of me. And of course, the stunning thing was, how can I generate this energy, this love? I mean, how is that possible? Then this love exploded, it went everywhere. And all of a sudden, I am immersed in this uh, light, white scintillating light. My body was hot, it was vibrating, as if the cells of my body were, you know, going with the scintillation of the light.
Mm-hmm.
And and I recognized that, of course, my consciousness was also out in everything, right, in this light that cover everything that I could see. So all of a sudden, I realized that I am both the observer and the observed. Again, a complete reversal of the sense of myself, because I am normally separate from what I observe. Observer and observer are completely different aspects of reality. Where now I am the observer of myself. And as I observe myself, my sense of self is both in me and in the world that I'm observing. So this is crazy. And then a thought comes to mind, and the thought is, oh my God, is a thought recognition. Wow, this is the stuff of which everything is made. So this white scintillating light is the substance out of which the universe is made. So the
Hmm.
universe is made of something like what I felt that observed itself. And that was the end of the experience. And of course, that experience changed me completely, because from, it was a 180 degrees. Basically, I was the opposite of what I had accepted myself to be, which was studying physics, studying science. I had accepted the fact that I'm the body, and as such, when the body dies, there is nothing is left of me, and all that kind of ideas that now I call scientism, because they're not ideas that are proven to be true. They're simply extrapolations from a starting point that accepts only the existence of what exists in space and time, and you can measure. But if you start with that, you have eliminated what is interiority that cannot be measured. So, science has started with an idea of the world that has eliminated a priori our humanity, our sense of who we are, our capacity to understand, and all of that of course have to pre-exist, or at least be concurrent in existence with everything. So, in other words, consciousness and free will cannot be cannot derive later from brains of animals. It must be right at the very beginning a part of reality, of the fundamental reality. And that, of course, that kind of, I'm saying what I'm saying now after 35 years of work. In At that
Yeah.
time, it was clear that I had hit and I had understood at an intuitive level a kind of understanding, intuitive understanding, which is what, of course, interiority is about, that require a rational analysis. And so, and that experience had such a power that it directed me to find out, you know, just like when you have as an inventor, you have an idea and you get it that, wow, this can work. And, and then you go and you start working until you make that idea work. Same way. I'm an
Yeah.
inventor, so I understand this. And so it was like a flash of insight that told me this is the way reality is, not what you thought. And 20 years later, I arrived after working very hard with myself. 30-40% of my time, I was running a couple of companies during that time. Um, so a lot of work to arrive at the conclusion, which was a conclusion that was the beginning of a new level of inquiry. The conclusion, which is an hypothesis, that consciousness and free will must be together, and they must be they must exist at the beginning of the universe. They cannot come later. They have to be part of the nature of everything.
Yeah. All music to my ears, both the way you arrived at this information and the conclusions you derived from this experience. And just to, I'm going to give an intro, so maybe I don't need to like give this full speech, but just to really put things in a proper context for the audience. You're a conventionally successful person, a hyper successful person by pretty much every societal measurement. Yet you in this time are experiencing this deep existential angst, unhappiness, as you say. And it's almost as if something hears that disquiet within you and says, this is what you're missing. But it reveals it in such a way that it's like you can only know it intuitively, like I was saying before. and there's like it's almost like handing you this non-dual Rubik's cube, right? Like this thing, like, okay, here's an intuitive knowledge of something, and maybe you could zoom in on some of the things you feel like you instantly intuitively knew about reality in that moment, and then you as an inventor, as a somebody who wants to know how things work technically, I would imagine it was just irresistible then for you to try as hard as you could to language this unlanguageable experience. But before we go there, what were some of those things that you felt like you instantaneously knew, that you instantly did a 180, as you said, into?
Well, I mean, the most important thing is that I am the universe observing itself with my point of view. I was observing
Yeah.
myself because my consciousness was in this, sea of white scintillating light that was coming out of me. So, so I am both the source and the observer. I am of this thing, that I am
Mhm.
observing, and what I am is love, joy, and peace, which is, wow, that's
Yeah.
crazy. I thought I was a human being, a machine made of biological stuff. And of course, in those days, I had not come to the conclusion that biology was had to be quantum and classical. I thought, I bought the idea that life is a classical phenomenon, which is not true. I mean, our cells are quantum and classical, so we are a collection of cells that work through principles which are not principles of classical physics, which are the principles that makes a computer work. The principle of quantum physics are completely different. So we are not built like a computer. In fact, every cell of my body contains the genome of the egg that created the entire body. So
Yeah.
the instructions, the 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 potential knowledge of the entire organism is contained within each of its parts. Our cells are parts whole. They are both part, but also whole because they have the genome of the entire organism. This is incredible. You know, a computer is made of transistors, on, off, on, off, on, off. That's it. What does a switch know about the entire computer and its workings? Nothing. Maybe just zero and one, but that's not much.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to get more into the theory, definitely, as the conversation goes on. But I know, so your exploration continues after this experience in a variety of ways, and I know some of that exploration was subjective. And we talked a little bit about this last time, and I remember you mentioning at some point, investigating consciousness via a variety of methods, including going to the Monroe Institute. And then I heard you mention in your most recent Essentia Foundation interview, that you had an out of body experience at one point. Was this, just for clarification? Was this the same occasion as the night in 1990, or was this a
No, completely
subsequent
different.
thing?
Okay, I had
Oh, okay.
hundreds. I had
Really?
hundreds of
Wow.
what you would call extraordinary experiences, where in they came in response to questions that I had, and they were spontaneous, just like the first one.
Wow.
I would have never imagined that something like what I experienced existed. I mean, if you had, so how can I ask to have an experience in a certain way if I don't even know that it's possible to have such an experience? For example, I experienced my consciousness as a point of light at the base of my sternum. Everything that existed was this point of light, and that was me. Then I experienced myself out of body, so I'm not even in the body. I'm outside the body. In this early experience, I was both inside and outside. But
Mm,
then what was outside was this light. It was not reality, the physical reality. Then I experienced myself as out inside and outside, but then at this time the outside was the conventional reality. So my consciousness was in the grass, in the trees, in the
Wow.
buildings that were in front of me, and so on. And then I experienced myself where and this, I believe, the way that I interpret this experience is a memory of something, that
Mm,
there was a field. There was a field, and in this field, all the qualia were all in this field of qualia, but there was no observer. So there was a field of stuff that I recognized as lights, as sounds, as emotions, but they were not my emotions because there was not me yet. So I
mm,
perceive, the way I reconstructed this later was that it, it was an experience when I was very young, maybe 1, 2 weeks old. So this other experience, So now it's before there is even an observer, but there is a field of stuff.
yeah.
I did just to
Yeah.
give you a
Wow.
few. Then I was out of body. Okay, so my consciousness is not even in the body; it's outside, and on it goes. So what and it was through these experiences that I could then construct a theory, because I had to explain whatever theory I could put together. It had to explain what I experienced. I mean, this is science. Science, you can experience what happens in the laboratory, and you can experience what happens within you. Except that generally, scientism, what I call, you know, now a religion, which is what we believe based on science, but it's
Yeah.
not science because it goes against the principles of quantum physics, for example. Scientism believes that only what exists, it can only exist in space and time, and exist only what you can measure. So if you believe that,
Yeah.
then we have eliminated any kind of inner experience. And when you do that, you eliminate our humanity, the fact that we have a soul, that we have a mind that can intuit things, and so on. So that this is the
Yeah.
situation that we have today.
My nemesis is absolutely procrastination. I sit down to do work, suddenly it's an hour later, and I'm just down some ancient aliens rabbit hole, and I haven't done a thing. Caffeine has always been a go to coping mechanism, but you know how it goes. You take a bunch in the morning, and then you crash in the afternoon, and then you're procrastinating in a whole new way. And on that note, that's why I was excited when Magic Mind hit me up. They offered to send me all 3 of their formulas, free, original, and max, and they said, try each one for a few days, see what you think, and if you like it, we'll be a sponsor. So why is Magic Mind different? Many reasons, but for one, they figured out how to make caffeine time released. It's called nano encapsulation. Basically, instead of blasting your brain all at once, it gives you a nice, smooth draw of caffeine over the course of many hours. No big spike or crash, and no procrastination. Honestly, I love all 3 formulas, but nothing beats a max in the morning. I am a max guy. It gets me into such a nice, buzzy flow state. It has 165 milligrams of caffeine, only 4 grams of sugar. Gives you that deep focus and energy. After just a few days, it absolutely helps me skip that morning procrastination. But the caffeine-free free version in the blue-green bottle is absolutely fantastic when you're already caffeinated. I was actually just traveling with a friend who's caffeine sensitive, and he swears by the free. So if procrastination is your archvillain like it is for me, this is your elixir, my friends. And as they're launching these new varieties, they've got 60% off of your first subscription purchase. But to get that discount, you've got to go to our link, magicmind.com/third eye 60, or use the QR code for more info with code third eye 60. And by the way, 100% money back guarantee. So you have nothing to lose except your procrastination. So I want to, this point about out of body experiences is of special interest to me, because since we spoke last in November, I actually went to Monroe Institute myself and did a whole gateway process retreat. I won't tell the story for the millionth time, but just to get to the punchline, so I was having a great experience there. Really wonderful group of people, and some profound experiences during the meditations. I was feeling a lot of those sensation, like energetic sensations in the body they talk about, but I did not think I was going to have a full blown out of body experience at all. And then on the last day, much to my surprise, I did. I had the full blown, like, unmistakable, absolutely ontologically quaking experience of, feeling my consciousness somehow solidifying into this vibrating energetic body that is like rising above my physical body, and it was just terrifying, awesome, surreal, but also hyper real. Like one of those things where, there's no possible way you could chalk it up to just a dream or just some experience that I've had before. Um, and granted, I didn't get control of it. I didn't have some great, amazing astral experience, nothing like that. But just the unmistakable sensation of separation from physical body and feeling yourself as this like vibrating electrical energetic body of some sort that I couldn't get control of, but it's, you have the experience, it's like being in a I
You know that is true. You know that is
yes.
real. In
Yes.
fact, most of the experiences that I had, that I call extraordinary experiences, are more real than what I call the reality of an ordinary experience. So how can that be? And of course, people that tell you what you should experience or what you should think about your experience,
Mhm.
are not cannot be correct, because you are the judge of your own experiences, not them that ever had such experiences. So shut up. If
Right,
you
exactly.
come
Yes.
on. I mean, you want to tell me what what I have experienced?
Yeah. I brought this up to Bernardo actually last time I spoke with him, and he kind of had an issue with it because he's like, I like, but what are you experiencing with? You're out of your physical body. So what do you have non-physical senses? And I was just kind of
Of
like, I
course,
I
you
don't
have
know.
non-physical senses, and that's the old problem. That you have. I mean, I actually had similar to yours, but actually, I was fully out of body, and I was out of
Mhm,
body
mhm.
a few seconds. But I got scared, and I was sucked
Yes.
in back into my body,
Yes.
and this happened 3 times. And then one night I woke up, and half of my body was out, and half was in, and I was awake. It was the most crazy thing. Half of me is
Yeah.
out, and and the rest is in.
Yeah. Yeah. So what would so for did you do a gateway retreat? What did you do at
I did.
Monroe?
I did. I did. I went to Monroe several times. Different. I
Oh,
did Gateway also. I never went out of body there. I had some extraordinary experiences there, but they were not out of body. They were other experiences. So it was an environment that was conducive to have other experiences. Deepening experiences. But not. I did not go out of body.
hmm. And any you'd be willing to share?
No, because I think I mean we will stay here for hours and hours, to share. I have shared enough. I think that the
Okay.
important thing is to understand that there is a theory that can actually explain this, because otherwise it's all kind of stuff, right? But
Of
I'm a
course.
physicist, and I want to understand what's going on, and what these experiences are showing, that there is a deeper reality that science today has ignored. Has ignored because it has been eliminated at the start by
Mhm.
the misunderstanding of what quantum physics has been telling us. Quantum physics has been telling us that the world is not the way we think the world works. And the interpretation of quantum physics is still up for grabs, because physicists have not agreed at all how to interpret the craziness of quantum physics. So, together with a famous physicist that is an expert in quantum physics, I have created a theory, and this theory explains perfectly the stuff that physicists have never understood. But of course, you know, as you know,
Mhm.
you get wedded to your own way of thinking, and so it's very hard to reach people that believe that know more than you. And so we are here to talk about this stuff, and I would like to tell you about this theory, because this is really the next step. Otherwise, we keep on arguing about something that cannot be checked or understood, because there is no theory even to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and though this is your theory, one of the things that I find so intriguing about it, as someone, as we discussed last time, for me, I'm really philosophically inspired by Platonism and Neoplatonism, and there's almost, and you've arrived at this separately, which I find so fascinating. But there does a lot with a lot of these core concepts seem to be an almost one to one mapping, and same with I know you mentioned being inspired by Leibniz, and same with, as you may know about Leibniz, he was definitely reading Plotinus, he was reading Proclus, he was corresponding with some of the Cambridge Platonists. So it seems like he was also influenced by that stream as well. And here you are, as someone who arrives at all of this completely separately, coming to very similar conclusions. So before we go down the philosophical route, let's get into your theory and the finer points of the theory, because I think this, one of the things you hear people bring up, this notion about the importance of quantum, just wielding that word irresponsibly, but you do just the opposite. You come to very clear definitions of what the quantum has to do with consciousness and how it fits into quantum theory in general. And so let's start with why is it important to go away from just the classical interpretation of what a human being is? Why can't it be bottom up, physical, epiphenomenal stuff that we can reduce down to its parts?
Okay. Yeah. So a few words of the distinction between classical and quantum. So the classical world is the world of objects, which are macroscopic objects. Macroscopic means something, that you can see with a optical microscope, not with a an electronic microscope. So composed of lots of atoms and molecules, but they are tiny objects that cannot even see. For example, a living cell, the smallest one, the bacteria, the smallest bacteria has already 10 billion atoms. So, my goodness, that's a lot of atoms. Okay. But that's the smallest one. You need a very, very major microscope to see that. In fact, you can hardly see it with a conventional microscope. But anyway, so that world is deterministic. What does it mean? It means that it can be described perfectly, at least for not forever, but for a short period of time. The time that depends on the complexity of the system and how much interaction that system, how much you can keep that system isolated from the rest of the world, and so on and so forth. But basically, you can have equations, mathematical equations that describe the motion of that object in space and time. Okay. So that reality is what today scientism believe is the only reality. Now, there is another physics, quantum physics, that describes particles, atoms, and molecules, very microscopic, very small, but not just that, because, for example, there are macroscopic quantum phenomena that are quite large and quite powerful. For example, a laser light. Laser light is quantum light, which appears, as a very sharp, is monochromatic, and all the photons are in phase. So this light maintains its coherence, so that even if you beam a beam of laser light to the moon, and the moon is only that beam is only a few meters wide. So, amazing coherence, right? Where if you beam a beam of monochromatic light, the beam diverges, enough that you wouldn't even, you wouldn't even see it in the moon. It would never stay coherent enough for that. And yet it is purely monochromatic light, but because it's not in phase, and that phase is quantum phase, is not necessarily the phase of the wave, the way you imagine it. But it's too complicated to go into the details. So let's stay at this level. So,
Sure.
so quantum physics. One of the major fundamental difference between quantum physics and classical physics is that the laws of quantum physics only tell you the probabilities of all the positions or velocities that you could determine a particle to be, for example, uh, but not where you will measure that particle or at what velocity will have that particle. It can only tell you the possibility, the probability of the possibilities.
Hmm.
So it
Hmm.
doesn't tell you what happens. What happens is indeterminate, though it will be with those probabilities and those possibilities. So it can tell you what you can know about, but
Hmm.
not what you will know when you make a measurement. And that is the major problem with quantum physics. It's called the collapse of the wave function. The
Wow.
collapse, it's called the measurement problem, which is
Right.
basically, one of the way in which you explain this incomprehensible phenomenon is called the collapse of the wave function, which says that when you make a measurement, you will measure randomly the position or the velocity that you will find for that particle will be a random event, non-algorithmic random event that you cannot predict. So if you prepare a system in, you prepare the same system in the same condition and you repeat the experiment, you can verify that the probabilities are exactly the way the theory tells you. But you had to make thousands of experiments of the same experiment, and then you find that the profile of probabilities is actually the behavior that you observe. But it's actually because a lot of particles, appears where they are highly probable, very few where they're low probable, nothing when there is zero probability that something be there. And so quantum physics cannot tell you what happens, because what happens is not determined by quantum physics. It's determined by something
Yeah.
else. And the
Right.
something else is the collapse of the wave function, which is just a phrase that means nothing really, because you cannot tell what happens. Only when you do many measurements, you will see that the measurements correlate with the probability. Yeah, but every time you measure, you do the experiment again, you will find that the particle appear in different orders in all these positions in which they appear, and yet they will build up at the end the same pattern, which is the
Hmm.
probability, is basically the probability distribution that is computed by the theory is reflected in the number of particles that are in different positions.
Yeah.
So saying that,
Tell.
then
Can I ask? Can I ask a
yeah,
question?
yeah.
It some in my non-expert understanding, sometimes it seems to me like we're trying to understand this deeper or higher quantum reality backwards, because the vantage point that we are asking from is a classical vantage point, right? Like we're trying to determine the reality of the quantum realm from our physical realm, and therefore we have to collapse the wave function by taking a measurement, and then we try to understand this deeper realm through what we would call a particle, which, you talk all the time that there is no particles, right? It's actually a state of a quantum field that is like existing in n-dimensional quantum space that's like everywhere and nowhere at the same time. So I think a lot of people are they're trying to understand what is the quantum realm, like where is it, but it's like even by trying to locate it within our lived physical experience, we're making some kind of like fundamental epistemological mistake, right?
You see, the yeah, what is going on is that in within scientism, quantum physics does not describe ontology. It's simply a mathematical theory. Is a mathematical theory that makes predictions about what you can measure in space and time. That's it. So it doesn't describe reality. It's a mathematical theory, it's a mental constructions that allows you to tell, it tells you all that you can know about physical reality. That's it. But in this new theory that I'm talking about of consciousness and free will, the quantum physics is actually is describing ontology, but it describes ontology in a way that is completely new, because we have never given ontology to this type of to consciousness and free will. In fact, scientism says that free will doesn't exist, and if free will doesn't exist, then consciousness has no purpose. There is no causality. So it's just an epiphenomenon of the brain. I mean, that's what most theories of consciousness say. There is no free will, and consciousness is simply an epiphenomenon of the brain. But in the theory that I have with Dariano, Professor Dariano, we say that consciousness is a property of a field, of a quantum field, that I will explain how. And free will is a property also that you cannot take apart. It is part of the workings of the quantum field. So consciousness and free will are aspects of the field that are integral to the operations of the field, and they exist as the field exists. And when I'm talking about the quantum field, quantum theory describes the fields, for example, of the particles, the field, the quantum field of electrons, the quantum field of quarks, the quantum fields of electromagnetic radiation, and so on and so forth. And so those are the fundamental fields. And in this theory, these fields are conscious and then free will. So what does consciousness and free will do then, and why? How can we explain them? All right. So let's take the field of electrons. The field of electrons, first of all, in quantum field theory, is the reality of electrons. Even though, as I said earlier, most scientism, the scientists, well, there is a problem here with the
with language. Yes,
with in Italian, I can say I can actually distinguish the scientist the scientist of science and the scientist of scientism. I can use two different words. It's hard to do it in English. At least they don't come right now. So let's forget about it. But basically, scientism is saying that the state of the electron, is actually what we call an electron. And the state of the electron is not separable from the field of electrons. So, it's not like, you can no longer think of a particle of the electron as a particle, because it is really a manifestation of the fields inseparable from the field. And this is this new way of thinking about electrons and fields really happened about 50 years ago. So it's not in the early days of in the early days of quantum physics, an electron was considered a wave or a particle, and it would behave either as a wave or as a particle. But in this new understanding, it is really the best way to imagine that is like a wave of a sea. The wave of the sea is like an electron, is something that happens in the sea, but the wave of the sea cannot be separated from the sea. So the same way an electron. The electron is a state, and it can appear and disappear. When it appears, it would appear in the measurement, in space and time, and you say, "Oh, I got it, an electron." But in reality, even that appearance will simply trigger a quantum to classical phenomenon in the instrument, and you would eventually say, oh, there is an electron over here, over here, over here, or there is an electron with this momentum or whatever. But whatever you do not see an electron as a classical phenomenon. It's just impossible to see. Okay, so the electron is a state that engenders some phenomena that you eventually can see in an instrument.
Yeah. So
The
just
field,
I just want to
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I just want to emphasize this point about fields, because it's just so mind blowing. And again, it takes some, I think, adjustment from thinking of a physical reality with separate stuff, as opposed to there is some ontological reality where the very reality of electronness in all of its manifestations exists in some kind of, from our perspective, omnipresent way that could manifest an individual particle electron if we do a measurement. But in reality, there's just this deeper reality of electronness, that, right? Like that's
Yeah, that's
and then
right.
when
I
you
mean,
extrapolate that when you extrapolate that into everything else that must have a field too, it starts to get just unbelievably mind-blowing.
well, I mean, you also have to consider then, the field, the separate fields are not separate from
Right.
a field of one. The totality of what exists is
Yes.
fundamentally a huge field that out of which you can, you have parts whole, just like, my cell, the cell of my body are
Mhm.
parts whole of the body, and they are inseparable in some way from the environment in which they are part, because you know a cell is not a closed system. It interacts with the environment, which are in the bodies, other cells. So we are, the separateness, the reductionism of scientism, materialism, which is the other property of scientism. That reductionism is not what reality is about. Basically, quantum physics is saying that the world is holistic. The universe is holistic, is not made of separable parts. Everything is interconnected within this world, this universe. That's what entanglement has shown. Entanglement is the property that particles that interact, they have properties in common that cannot be
Hmm.
known. They cannot be measured except when you prepare them in a special way, and only for very simple systems. But fundamentally, everything is entangled with everything else in ways which are impossible to know. And the picture that comes out is that one, the totality of what exists, is not made of separable parts. And that is fundamental. That's,
Yeah.
what was my take home, in my first experience, that I was not separate from I was not an observer separate from the observed. Part, I was observer and observed. And now the fields are observers, observed, and agents. In quantum physics, there are all three of those. When, anytime that there is an interaction, you have a field that asks a question, so to speak, the other one that responds to that question with free will. And the question is asked with free will. And so the question is the instrument that we built, forces the field to interact, the field of the observed to interact with a proper field within the instrument, to create an interaction where now you will see then the result, and you then create the theories of quantum physics. But that's what's going on. What's going on is not that there is a world ruled by mathematics. No, that's scientism. And that's valid only partially within the classical world. In the classical world, you can actually predict things up to a certain level because there is chaotic behavior, and chaotic behavior is determinism that, however, requires the knowledge of the initial conditions to a precision which is impossible because quantum physics doesn't allow you to know those, position and velocity, for example, with infinite precision. And also there is all continuous disturbance and interaction between objects and the quantum vacuum. Quantum physics, the quantum vacuum is not nothing. Quantum vacuum is an active participant to the world of quantum physics. So, all of a sudden we have a completely different reality to deal with. But to go back to the theory then, if we start with the idea that a quantum field is conscious and has free will, then we can explain the properties of the quantum fields that otherwise will not be explainable. What are those properties? First of all, the state of the quantum field is a vector with n components, and the components are complex numbers, and they represent probability amplitudes. Don't ask me to define all these terms because otherwise we stay here another half an hour. But basically what it means is that this state exists in an abstract mathematical space. It's not in space and time. Okay, it's an abstract mathematical space. But it has two crucial properties which are exactly the properties of our conscious experience. That's why we can say that the quantum field is conscious, because those two properties are, number one, the quantum state cannot be reproduced. There is a theorem, called the no cloning theorem in quantum physics, that says that the state of a field cannot be reproduced, cannot be known. You cannot make a copy. If you cannot make a copy, you cannot know, because to know, you have to make a copy of what you know. You cannot do that. Not only that, second theorem of Olivo, says that when you make a measurement of a state, at the most, you can get 1 bit per quantum bit. And the quantum bit, the quantum state can be described by a vast number, typically, of a quantum bits that are entangled, that have properties in common that are unknowable. So, an entanglement exists only in the quantum world. It does not exist in the classical world. The classical world can be described by bits, classical bits, 0 or 1. But the 0 or the 1 have nothing in common with each other or with other bits. They are separate, independent, deterministic states. Not so with the quantum state, because if you measure one of the quantum bits of a state, the ones that are connected are affected by that measurement. And so it's impossible to actually make a measurement without changing what you measure in a fundamental way. So now, these are exactly the properties of a conscious experience. My conscious experience, I am a field, and my conscious experience is private, meaning I cannot reproduce it. I can, the love that I feel, I cannot express it as I feel it. I'm the only one to know the love that I feel for someone or for myself, whatever it is. That the feelings, the qualia, which are the sensations and feelings that bring the knowing to me, those qualia are private, exactly like the quantum state. The quantum state is private. And what I can say about what I feel, or what someone from the outside can measure, if they could measure what I feel, for example, opening up the brain and measuring the signals in the brain, okay? That measurement will only give you a 1 bit per quantum bit. So, and also what I can say is only a small part of what I feel. So now, what it means then is that quantum state of a field is the mathematical representations of a conscious, of the qualia, of the conscious experience, of the qualia. But the mathematical representation of the qualia cannot be the qualia. The qualia is my experience. The field that is conscious, you can represent the quantum state, say that's qualia, but only the field knows within the field its own experience, its own qualia. That's the ontology. The ontology is only described by the map of the territory, which is the mathematical representation. So the mathematics is the map of a territory, which is the ontological deeper reality, which is the fact that fields know their own state. Now, of course, that's a step that has to be accepted as, as a postulate. But if you think for a second about it, it explains why you have states that cannot be measured, and that cannot be copied. Exactly like we have experience. We experience stuff. Our qualia cannot be copied and cannot be measured. And all I can say about what I feel is that, when I say I love you to my son that I love, I'm not transferring what I feel. I'm transferring my interpretation or the meaning of the qualia that I feel. But the meaning of the qualia, which is what I then put into symbol, don't even exist in science, because in science, information is only what you can measure. So is a complete, and it is a probability, is associated, the amount of information is associated with the probability of what you measure. For example, the higher the probability that you can measure a certain symbol, the lower is the content of information, the amount of information that carried by that symbol. That's how information is defined. That definition says nothing about the meaning of the information. For us, the information is the meaning carried by symbol. What we call information is the meaning of the symbol.
Yes.
That's not what science calls information. Information says simply the probability that a symbol appears is what carries information. The probability of the appearance of symbols is what carries information. Completely different. So exactly, and it is by this fundamental difference in understanding that uses the same words that are deceptive, that we are actually getting thrown away from the deeper reality that we are. The same thing is happening today with artificial intelligence. We call intelligence what is not intelligence. Intelligence is about the meaning of symbols, just like information is about the meaning of symbols, not the symbols or their appearance or their correlations.
Really,
that is the major problem today that confuses everybody, and that's the source of what I call scientism as it relates to consciousness and free will. Now, I did not explain free will, so let me say that, and then we can go to the third part. But at least
Let's also zoom in on some of the other core components that you talk about in Irreducible too, because I think we were just pointing to one of these core concepts like satiety, this combination of words.
But let's not do that, Michael.
Okay.
Let's finish the theory. Otherwise, it's because there are so many new concepts here, and we can jump up and down, but I would want to at least say the theory, the core theory, and what it means for quantum physics and the interpretation of quantum physics and so on. So now we have defined consciousness for a field. So consciousness is a property that a field has to experience its own state. That's what consciousness is, and the state of the field must have the same properties of the experience of the state, which is the experience is private and can only be we can only know a small portion of it. That's it. But now that the field is conscious, now that field then is the one that decides what to manifest when it is measured. It is the field that decides what to manifest, not the observer. The observer is the one that asks a question by setting up an instrument that is trying to, that will interact, will force an interaction with the field that you, or the particle that you want to know about. So the field that so for example, you're observing an electron, and you have set up an instrument that wants to determine the position of an electron in a measurement, in an experiment. And so where would the electron show up? It would be the collapse of the wave function. So it would show up in all possible positions where there is probability that is greater than zero, and with no rhyme or reason. It will appear, randomly at the various positions. This theory says, the field decides where to manifest the electron. So that's it. The collapse of the wave function has been explained as a decision of free will of the field that is observed. By what? By the instrument. The instrument is the one that is observing the field. And then the observer that set up, if it's a human being that set up the experiment, is the one that allowed this interaction to occur. So there was a theory many, many years ago that attributed the collapse of the wave function to the consciousness of the observer, which was the person that set up the experiment. This is not what this theory says. This theory says that the free will is the free will of the field that you are observing. That is the free will that this determines where this, because that symbol is the symbol with which that field communicates with the field of the instrument that is interacting with it. Because the fundamental reality is that these fields communicate with each other, their own meaning, to know themselves and the other.
Sorry, your connection got a little choppy for a second, but this just helped me understand a philosophical concept that I've really struggled to understand, which is, have you heard of this Greek concept of hyparxis before?
The what?
All right, jumping back in from a little technical error, but I was saying to Federico, his explanation of how it's really this deeper reality of the field that is making the free will choice really made this kind of esoteric Greek philosophy idea make more sense to me, which is this term of hyparxis. So a lot of times, if you're reading Platonism, you'll come across these terms like that are kind of hard to wrap your mind around. And hyparxis is essentially this idea of what is one sort of higher on the metaphysical ladder, but two, it also has more causative will, more free will, more agency than something with less hyparxis. So it's a perfect example because in Federico's metaphysical view, it's the field that we are physically manifested from. Therefore, the field should have more free will and more hyparxis. So it kind of made that whole thing click for me. So thank you for that.
In this way, my decision, which I attribute to the body, my decision. I'm a field. I'm not the body. So the decision of what I will manifest is basically the decision of the field. And here we have to be a little careful, because the self of the field is much vaster than the ego, which is what we normally think we are. We normally think we are the body. So what we think we are is a small portion of the self that we are. Is that portion that only pays attention to the symbols, to the information produced by the body. And that's where, we also don't understand who we are, because we think we are our body, because we are convinced that we can only experience what the body is presenting to us. But that is not true, because we also experience dreams, for example, which is certainly when our eyes are closed and everything else. Where is the dream coming from? Where is the experience of the dream coming from? Especially
Yeah.
some of the most vivid and most powerful dreams that are, precognitive dreams, for example, or dreams where you had solutions to problems, which I had many of. So we are vaster being with a vaster consciousness than what we think we normally are. And when we awake by realizing that we are not the body, like in my first awakening experience that I described earlier, and I realized that I'm the world observing itself. So I'm certainly not, I'm not the body. So in that experience, then once you make a connection with your vaster self, then the information exchange between the ego and the vaster self increases dramatically, and it
Mm.
comes in the form of other extraordinary experiences of consciousness, in more intuitions, and so on, and generally a better satisfaction in your life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and it feels kind of like we're leading into this third part I wanted to
Yes.
explore with you, which are like the implications of this. But do you think you got through the core parts of the
Yes, I
theory?
got the core part of
Okay.
the theory, which is, now in summary, we are a field. The field is
Yes.
conscious and has free will, and the consciousness of the field can be represented by the state. The state of the field represents the qualia of the conscious experience of the field. And
Yeah.
the free will is the ability of the field to manifest whatever symbols, whatever symbol it wants, to express what its inner state is. And it's the
Yeah.
field that expresses his own inner state, not someone that forces, or randomness forces an answer, or randomness. No, that's not the case. We have free will. Free will means free will to express whatever portion of our own meaning, which is the meaning of qualia. Is the qualia are the bringers of meaning. The meaning is the deeper aspect of for example, of the quantum information, which represents the state of the field. So in this type of view, there are three aspects which are inseparable: the
Yeah.
body, the mind, which is expressed by the quantum state, and the spirit, which is expressed by the meaning of the experience, which is brought by the qualia, which is expressed, symbolically by the quantum state.
Hmm. And this maps onto your concepts of like CI and P space, right?
Yeah, that's
Like,
right. The
yeah.
CIP framework, correct.
Yeah. So that's consciousness, information, and then the physical. And in my notes, to restate everything he said, if anybody wants a breakdown of this, I have a quick one, and you can tell me if I'm right here. So consciousness has sort of a core nature of being the realm of meaning, intention, direct knowing, the fundamental substrate of reality. Then information is the actual, it's not the symbols themselves that we use, but it's the realm of symbols, logic, that that actually exists behind whatever the map of information we're using is. So the information, the language, the mathematics is actually pointing to this I space, right? That actually exists behind our human made symbolic representations. And then the physical is the sort of virtual interface that we use to experience what we think of as reality, which is not actually the primary reality. It's like the headset, like
Yep,
as Don Hoffman would say.
that's right. The It's like a virtual reality, that, however, is not completely virtual, like the virtual reality of a computer, because it is based on states of the fields that are not separable from the fields. Whereas the 1 and 0 of the computer are conventions that we have created in making the computer in such a way that the computer functions by maintaining those conventions. But they are conventions that you will never find if you don't know the convention. You don't know where they are inside the operation of the computer. The circuits are designed in such a way to respect those conventions. And we did that on purpose, of course. And so the computer simply is not a machine, not a deterministic system that does whatever we told it to do. It has no mind of its own, even if we talk as if it did, never mind consciousness, because the mind is only the information processing. Quantum physics is the quantum information processing of the field that is actually trying to figure out what is perceiving and what it means. So the mind, in this body, mind, spirit that I had conceptualized here, the mind is also the information processing of the quantum information. The body is only the information processing of the classical information, of the bits. That happens in what we call the body, which is the brain, for example. The brain is, the working of the brain is really the working of a quantum classical computer, but deterministic. It's made of bits. Eventually, it comes out into bits because that's what the signals in the brain. They are all numbers. They can all be reduced to bits.
Right.
But the experience that we have goes beyond anything that can be represented. You can only represent symbols. You cannot represent experience. And that's the deeper part that scientism eliminated, because there is only what you can measure. But what you can measure are numbers. But the experience is not numbers. The love that I feel is not numbers. It goes beyond numbers, beyond the representation. It is the essence of reality. And the meaning of the experience is even deeper, and that's the spirit. The meaning of the experience is, wow, I understand now what it means, what that love that I feel, what it means to me. That's where we are. We are much deeper beings, and we have been sold short by scientism, by this religion that pretends to be science, because the science with the capital S has not spoken about this. But the scientism is the people that believe that they know, and they gain power by insisting that what they know is the truth, and so on and so forth. And but they don't know, because they started with presumptions that are not correct. They started with postulates. If you start by saying that reality is all that you can measure in space and time, you have eliminated what is not in space and time. And now many scientists are saying, well, there is not even space and time. Space and time is emergent property of something deeper. Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. But I'm saying in the context of consciousness and free will, which is a completely different context than what, even scientists with the capital S are doing right now. Because some of the scientists, they want a physics without space and time, like Don Hoffman often talks about. But for the physicist, that has nothing to do with consciousness and free will. It is just another mathematics. I'm saying that mathematics is created by consciousness, not the other way around. You cannot explain consciousness with mathematics, because consciousness is the one that creates mathematics as a representation of its own nature. But the representation of reality is not reality. Consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality that cannot be represented by mathematics. Or if it can be represented by mathematics, you can only represent a small portion of it, because mathematics doesn't have the completeness that is necessary to represent the totality of what exists, which is not made of separable parts. There
Hmm.
are no sets with things that are either inside the set or outside the set, because there are no boundaries. When you have something which is made, which is holistic, there are no boundaries. Just like there is no boundary between red and orange. Where is the boundary between red and orange? There isn't. There is a region where is both red and orange, or neither red nor orange, whatever you want to call it, but it's not. It's a continuum.
Let me. I'm curious about when we're talking about symbols like the Arabic numbers that we use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or we're talking about the colors we perceive. Is there a deeper reality that those kinds of symbolic manifestations point to? Like, is there a logic that exists behind space and time that this is pulling from, like some kind of realm of forms, or like some kind of mind space that really is the sort of uh treasure chest of where logic comes from? Or is that simply how things look from our perspective, trying to understand like a higher consciousness that we can't understand from a physical standpoint?
Logic only makes sense in the world of space and time and objects, in the classical world. And even then is not sufficient, but it is necessary. If the Gödel's theorems, right?
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
are
Yeah.
showing that even if you have an axiomatic system, mathematical system, you can make statements that cannot be proven if they're right or wrong. If they're true or false. Which means they're either true or false. But or if you prove that they're true, then they're false, but
Yeah.
essentially, they you would have to take the true one and the false one and say they are both true, and you create two separate theories. For example, you know the axiom of the parallels in geometry. If you say, since it cannot be derived from the other axioms, you can say, I don't believe in this axiom, and so I accept that there are parallels that actually meet, or parallel that actually diverge. And what you have defined is Riemannian and another geometry, which is Lobachevsky geometry. So two different geometries, plus the geometry in which the parallel stay parallel, which is the conventional Euclidean geometry. But they are incompatible with each other. So if you say the reality is Riemannian, well, you cannot then say that the parallels will never meet, because they will meet in Riemannian geometry. So you
Hmm.
see, so you can create different realities based on the fact that logically you cannot prove that the theorem, the postulate of the parallels, is correct or not.
I'm assuming you're familiar with Michael Levin, the biologist.
Yeah.
So he for instance has this idea of what he calls Platonic morphospace, right? Like some kind of non-physical space that biology is somehow you know, interfused with, that allows a biological system to, for instance, know when to stop growing, right? Because if if you look at it from the materialistic perspective and you try to make a bottom up explanation for how complex biological systems form, you run
Hmm.
into all these logical problems. Like, well, how does it know when to stop growing? How does how does one of Michael Levin's xenobots, or these very simple um, organisms that he removes from their native environment, how does it suddenly seemingly learn how to adapt in a new space? And his argument or his theory is that there is some higher order that these things must be pulling from, some kind of higher
Well,
meaning
in my
template.
that
Yeah,
in my theory that the a cell or a animal associated to that cell or animal, there is a field, and so that the
right. Okay.
comprehension and the decisions are in the fields. I mean that's what I'm explaining already. It's basically the comprehension, the experience of the actual interaction with the world, and the comprehension of it, and the decisions are coming from the field that controls the body. The body is controlled by a field, so all the spiritual aspects, if you want, are in the field, uh, and 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 some of the mind aspects are also in the field, and then the body is only the portion which is in space and time. That portion which is
Hmm.
in space and time is what we observe with with our sensory system, in our brain, that processes the information of the sensory systems that we have. But our sensory system doesn't see everything; only sees a small portion of what's out there. Uh, uh,
Yeah.
so and of course, if we were to see deeper than what we see, we would actually change dramatically what we see, because we would have to interact quantumly, and we would change what we interact with, which is exactly what the
Yeah.
fields do. They change each other. They affect each other when they interact.
Hmm. That makes sense. That makes sense. So what does this mean? A question I'm sure on everybody's mind here now is, these very practical questions about, essentially these like root level existential questions of, why do I, as a manifestation of my particular field or satiety or soul or whatever you want to call it, why do I exist? What am I doing? What happens to me after my physical death? Why did I separate from the one? Why? Um, and I'll stop there because that's quite a bit
Yeah, I mean
to explore. Yeah.
that's what in my third book, which is not translated in
Oh, okay.
English yet, I'm discussing. Basically, I start with a postulate which says that one, the totality of what exists. So one is the universe, everything, all that exists, is dynamic, is holistic, and wants to know itself. So, you know, when I say dynamic and holistic, I have described what quantum physics is already saying about the universe. But I'm adding wants to know itself. And it is the want and to know itself. The want is about the will, which becomes the free will of the fields. And the know itself is what requires consciousness. For one to know itself, you must be conscious, because conscious is what allows us to know ourselves. So, I mean, it's defined that way. That's what allows us to go, is consciousness. So when one knows itself for the first time in a certain direction, it creates a field, a part whole of itself. It
Hmm.
creates a field, a part whole of itself. So
Like a
now,
hologram.
yeah, just like a cell of my body is a part whole of the organism, same stuff. It's,
Hmm.
my cell is an hologram.
Yes.
You
Yes.
see, this is what, I mean, we are not reading reality right if we insist that we want to see only what we want reality to be. And so we only make test certain things. We don't want to see that other stuff and so on. So scientism is restricting existence and everything that exists, because they project into existence materialism and reductionism. And it's real only what you can measure. Well, when you say that, everything else that you cannot measure, everything else that exists in a deeper reality is eliminated.
Right. So on this question of, we definitely, I think, did a little lap around a lot of those things I just posed to you, but I've heard you speculate about this before, but I would love for you to share with this audience that hasn't heard it. What do you think happens in terms of like the continuity of our experience when the physical body expires?
Well, I did not have this experience, but there are many that have what is called a near-death experience. So there are,
Yeah.
you know, thousands and thousands of accounts of near-death experiences, and they are very similar. And basically, when the body, begins to die, because if they are resuscitated, means that it was not completely dead. But of course,
Right.
death is not a switch on off. It's a process that goes from the heart stopping, then the brain, is it no longer electrical signals in the brain, or then starts things start breaking down, and if you repair the body fast enough, then you resuscitate what was clinically dead, or else it continues, it goes by its way, right? It becomes irreversibly dead. But basically, as soon as a person, or soon after the person is died, it may have an experience that has been recorded many times, where people see themselves over the body, and they see what's happening in, where they are. For example, if this happened in a hospital, they see the operation being done by the team of doctors and nurses, and they report properly what happened. And then they move into a different environment where they experience people that are already dead. They knew their parents, perhaps friends, and so on. They have an experience full of love, joy, and peace, and they would like to stay there. But someone tells them that they got to go back to their body because they haven't finished doing what they came to this world to do. And so then they wake themselves. They're awake, and sometimes they tell that experience. Sometimes they keep it for themselves. But the point is that those experiences are very similar. So how can a brain that doesn't work anymore, body that is shut down because the heart doesn't work, has experiences of this sort? And by the way, they have done a study and found that more than 90% of the people that had this experience are changed by that experience. In other words,
Yeah.
that experience is transformative, just like my extraordinary experience of consciousness transformed myself and directed the life in a completely different direction. So to me, those are significant events, unless you care only about what you can measure. But if you care about something deeper, those are significant events, and they saying that there is much more. Then there are other experiments which are really based on hypnotic regression, where
Yeah.
people describe having died, having had experiences like the near-death experience when they died, but then finding themselves together in an environment where they had a life review. They had, there are all kinds of other stuff, and then remembering other lives, and so all of a sudden you see that you know that that what happened when your body dies, there is a continuity of experience, and in many cases, if you believe these stories, people connect themselves with prior lives that they had, that they have forgotten when they were in this life. So all of this, uh, you know, evidence, which is scientism doesn't consider evidence. All this evidence is pointing that there is a deeper reality that we reconnect with. Now
Mm.
you can just throw it away because you don't want it, But if you begin to do a personal journey, then you can begin to see that there is a lot of truth there. And so all of this thing needs to be explored. I'm not saying that this is what it is. I'm saying that there is much deeper realities that are showing that what we think we know is only a tiny little bit of what exists. So let's go find
Definitely.
out.
Yeah, well put, well put. So one of the ideas that I am always struggling with, my metaphysical biases of this idea that there is, like you postulate, this deeper self that is not physical, that is, indestructible, immortal, which is essentially what, even go back to um Socrates saying the same thing just before he dies, before he chooses to drink the hemlock. He would rather destroy and corrupt his physical form than live out of tune with what he conceives of to be higher justice. And he goes into this whole speech of the truth of what I am is this immortal, incorruptible thing anyway. So this physical body's going to die in a few years. So I'd rather die in a just way than just crumble away and become a shell of myself. And so we've collectively, and of course there's so many corollaries to this in Eastern philosophy as well. So we've collectively, it seems like, as a human organism, had this intuition, but then there's always this more nuanced question of, if that is true, if there is this deeper reality of this immortal, uncorruptible thing, what is that deeper thing trying to do? How is that deeper thing evolving? I know you have this core idea of the one is trying to know itself, but how would something like a satiety or a field or a soul,
We are part soul, Michael. We are part
yeah,
soul of
yeah,
one. We are doing the same thing that one does. We want to know ourselves because one knows itself by us that have that it created in the knowing of itself. And so we
hmm,
are
hmm,
emanation of one that have
yeah,
the same characteristics of one, and therefore the same motivation to know ourselves. And of course, the most evolved human beings all have wanted to understand what's going on. So the question that we all ask is, what why are we here? What are we doing? Why this world? What is
hmm,
going
hmm,
on? It's all about knowing. Even science is about knowing, except it's perverted a bit toward making money with science, making technology, using it, and not just for knowing. But science came from a desire to understand who are we are, what is this world,
hmm, hmm,
and now it's all about making money. That's not true. That is not correct. That is not what science should do. I mean, there is nothing wrong with making money or developing technology to better humanity, but not to kill each other. And that's exactly what's going on today. And so
yeah,
the problem that we have in front is a problem of ethics and a problem of who are we really and what is right and what is wrong, which is not and scientism says that life and the purpose of life is the survival of the fittest. So the one that kills you is the fittest because he survives and you don't. So is that what is true? I say no. We
no,
are here to know each other. We are here, and to know myself, I need to know the other because we are parts whole. The To know what I have inside of me, which is the whole, I need to know you because you are part whole of one, and
yeah,
vice versa. So it is about cooperation. This theory says that cooperation is at the source, at the foundation of life, at the foundation of reality, not competition. And
yeah,
so that changes from this to that. That's
yeah, right. That does make sense to me completely. Another thing I'm dying to ask you about is, so if there's this deeper reality that is non-physical, that the physical is emanating from. How do you look at the ecology once you go behind the physical realm? Is there a whole ecology of intelligences that have some degree of agency, that are having some degree of personalized experience? And could those could your interpretation of this account for what people experience as non-human intelligence or paranormal events or like extraterrestrial encounters? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, basically there is a hierarchy of fields. As fields, you know, the hierarchy of fields, for what we know today, would start with the fields of the elementary particles. There is nothing, simpler than that. But then, the elementary particles combine and create atoms, and then molecules, and then macromolecules, and blah blah blah, and we have animals and so on, right? So there is a hierarchy of fields associated with each hierarchy of physical structures, which are combined
Mm.
quantumly together, because it is the quantum fields that are the matter here. And so, for example, the my body is a structure, is a physical structure, is a symbol of a field, which is my field, who I really am, that is connected with the essence of who I am, which, for what we know today, would be the DNA of the egg that created me.
Hmm.
You see, but it may not be. I mean, this is the best that we can say with what we know today. But the point is that the, you know, my deeper reality is not the body. The body comes and goes, just like a particle comes and goes. We thought one time that the particles were, they were the conservation of matter. Well, that's not true at all. Particles, electrons come and go. Particles come, they if they interact, they could even, become different particles, or different particles may combine and create something new, and so on and so forth. So there is, but all those combinations that are crucial, where there are creative combination, where the whole is more than the sum of the parts, are quantum. Because in classical structures, the whole is just the sum of the parts. There is nothing more than the sum of the parts in classical physics. But in
Right.
quantum physics, no. Just look at an electron and a proton that combine into an atom of hydrogen. The atom of hydrogen doesn't have the sum of the properties of the two parts. Absolutely not. It's a completely different structure with unbelievable properties that are neither in the electron nor the proton. But they come from the fact that the deeper reality is one, is not separate. So the atom of hydrogen is partaking of that continuity of properties of this stuff, that there are inseparable things, and so it manifests a little more of that inseparableness.
Hmm. Hmm. So if an individual is experiencing what they perceive to be contact with some kind of other consciousness that may appear to have a physical appearance or not, do you think about that as something that is extant in a non-physical place, is just a momentary perturbation of the one field, or are you open to this idea, like you've said, that there is this hierarchy of fields? So the assumption I'm making off of that would be that each of these fields could be conscious in its own way and could have its own experience of reality, that is completely non-physical or is partially non-physical, and that may have the ability to navigate this non-physical space in ways we can't even imagine. Or what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, for example, the 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 experience of my thoughts, right? My thought.
Hmm.
Um, it's like what quantum physics does, right? In other words, I can have superposition of states, that I hold in my thoughts, not in
Yeah.
physical reality, but in my thoughts. I'm trying to figure out different ways in which I could go, I must hold the various possibilities in superposition. They could all be real, but they're not real yet because they're not actualized. But then I choose one with my free will, and I actualize that. Okay,
Yeah.
that's exactly what I do already in my thought. It's just like the collapse of the wave function, and I have wave functions that are describing essentially the mind of the universe, which my mind is a portion of it.
Hmm.
You see, so quantum physics is really describing something that is even more real than what is manifested, because what is manifested is a little small portion of this deeper reality, which is what
Yeah.
generates the reality in space and time. And once you go there, I mean, you 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 can, you have so many other ways to explore
Yeah.
that are now forbidden because scientism constrain you into space and time and thinking about, you know things that are real only if you can measure them. Come on.
Right. Yeah. It's like trying to, we can easily project what it would be like to live on a two-dimensional plane, but as soon as you try to take your 3D derived brain and try to place it into the like another try to put another axis on reality, there's just something about it that feels almost impossible to do unless you're describing it through mathematics in a more symbolic way or something. So we can't even imagine what it would be like to have that kind of an experience. And I would suspect that when we do have that kind of an experience, it's like what you experienced in 1990.
Well, yeah, but your experience will be maybe completely different than mine. You see, because m- the field cannot
Hmm.
copy its own state. It
Right.
cannot. It can only be known by the field. So this is what quantum physics is saying. When you say that the quantum field cannot be cloned, that's what physicists say. It means that the quantum field either can be known within the field by the field itself, and then it becomes its own experience, and then we have a theory of consciousness, or is something that we don't know. That's the way it is because math says that that's the way it is, which is what physicists are saying today. There is no reason why the quantum information cannot be copied, other than the mathematics says that it cannot. But the, the information of a computer, the data and program of a computer can be copied perfectly as many times as you want. So that's not the same information because that can be copied, but the other one cannot. Forbidden. So
Hmm.
what does it mean? Well, you can choose to try to figure it out, which is what I have done, or simply say, I don't know and I don't care because I can use it to make quantum computers or something, which is what most scientists do today. But,
Yeah.
you know, but actually, that explains exactly why I am conscious. If I am a field, my consciousness has exactly the same properties. My experience cannot be copied. My inner state cannot be copied. There is an inner state that cannot be copied, cannot be known. And if it cannot be known, BS. But if it can be known, that's divine consciousness. If it can be known, it's because the field is conscious. Now you can choose to accept that or not. If you don't accept it, good. I mean, you know, I'm not saying that you have to accept it, but at least this explains something with having the same properties of what you are explaining. You know,
Yeah.
You cannot explain consciousness as something that a computer can have, because the information of a computer can be copied. It's not private. Where your experience, which is a conscious experience, is private. So,
Yeah. It really makes sense. It's a very elegant idea, the more I listen to you, the more it makes sense to me, and the more I find myself agreeing. And it really feels like it explains almost everything that I can think of. I'm so curious about this third book, though. This one that's not translated into English yet. Is it a
well, it goes
more
deeper. It goes
philosophical?
deeper into what the
Okay.
second book is talking about, and it will come out hopefully soon, as soon as I finish translating it.
Yeah. Are you doing the translation too?
Of course, I
Oh,
wrote
wow,
it
wow.
partly in English and partly in Italian. I mean, I'm bilingual, so I
Yeah.
use the best of both worlds.
Can you give me like a sort of high level of what this
I already
third book
told you
explores?
that I start with the
Okay.
postulate. The postulate of being. I call it the postulate of being, which is one, the totality of what exists is dynamic, holistic, and wants to know itself. And if you start there, then you can explain quantum physics. You can explain everything.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. What is
and,
the
and,
what is the third book?
and furthermore, this postulate is self-evident because you are conscious and
Right.
you also have a limited free will. So you know what free will is and you know what consciousness is. So everybody can understand it. If you read the postulates of quantum physics, you do not understand it unless you study for 5 years.
Right. Yeah.
and then,
Yeah.
and then you still don't understand it, but at least you understand what they're saying. Because
Yeah.
if you read them before having studied all the math and all this stuff that is necessary, you will not even understand it. What I'm telling you, a child understands. In fact, a
Right.
child will be it will more simply accept it because he hasn't got all this construction that says no, 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 don't go there. No, intuition doesn't exist. No, emotions are bad for you. I mean, all this stuff that scientism is saying to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Who do you think of the legacy quantum physics big intellectuals was the closest to getting it right? Was it maybe like Schrodinger?
Well, Schrodinger, the what is life, his little book, what is
Yeah. Yeah.
life,
Yeah.
such a unbelievable understanding, way beyond what a typical biologist today understands, because a typical biologist thinks that life is biochemistry. No, no, it is way beyond. It's quantum physics, which is really quantum information. And it's a
Right.
kind of quantum and classical information that we don't even know, that I call live information. A different kind, something which we don't know, and we need to understand, because to explain life, living cells, how they work, we cannot explain them with just with biochemistry. We got to go beyond. We got to go in with an informational theory that understands quantum and classical information interacting with each other. That's what is
Yeah.
necessary. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I haven't read What Is Life, but I know that Schrodinger, as he got older, he got much more philosophical and became much more interested in like Eastern mysticism and a lot of these concepts that you now talk about. And I've always thought that was extremely compelling because you get to your point about the complexity of quantum physics. You have all these different interpretations, right? That kind of points to how complex it is and how theoretically dense it is to even try to get to understanding the core postulates that quantum physics is comprised of, because it is so cloaked in mathematics and concepts. um but then when you get one of the founding fathers of it, one of the most famous heads in it, going in that direction, and it wasn't just him either. I mean, there multiple of them went in this more mystical direction. It seems like later in life, and from everything I've talked to you about, it makes complete sense why that would be the case. But there's still such a resistance, it seems like, in the academy to interpreting quantum physics in that way. Like And I wish I understood the technicals of it better so that I could personally speak to that. But maybe that would just get in the way of getting to the deeper truth or something.
Well, you have to understand the mathematical, what is mathematics telling you.
Right.
But but the mathematics is not God, and the mathematics that we found is the best way that we can describe information that came via experiments. It was experimental. It was experiments that said, classical physics gives you the wrong answer for this thing. So if you use the concept of quantum, classical physics, you cannot explain this phenomena. And this phenomena, could be explained only with quantum quantum states and eventually fields and all this stuff that have properties which are incomprehensible. They are incomprehensible because, first of all, how come that the mathematics doesn't tell you what you can measure? It only tells you the probabilities. Because how is that? If you accept that there is free will, if you do not accept that there is free will, then it's incomprehensible. But if you accept that there is free will, then it has to be that way, because mathematics cannot tell you what you are going to create later on, which cannot be described by an equation. It's non-algorithmic. A decision that I make later in my life is not predictable. That's it. But if you want a predictable world, and most scientists, most priests of scientism, don't want that. Don't want that reality. They want something which is predictable, because predictability gives them power of predicting. So they can tell you how reality works. But but if you look at the situation, and if you ask yourself, what do I need in order to have free will? You need a collapse of the wave function, the way it manifests itself, which is random and non-algorithmic. That's what you need. But then if you don't want that, then you will never understand why reality has to be this way. This is what, part of the misunderstanding and the confusion is that most scientists don't want to go there. They want deterministic reality. Einstein, he did not like quantum physics, despite his more mystic kind of appear to be mystic mindset. Actually, he wanted a deterministic world, which was against any kind of freedom, because determinism means, it is what it is, man. And in fact, the only way to understand general relativity is with the block universe, which basically is plotting, is a film where each photogram is a three-dimensional universe, and the next universe is the next instant, is next and next and next, and everything is already exists. So determined. Now you have the block universe, and the block universe is saying that the universe is static, and it has everything that ever existed and ever will exist is already all there. That's what explains what Einstein had in mind. But that's not what it is. That's not the reality that we live in. And you cannot explain why then do we have different experiences. The world should be objective, completely objective. You cannot explain consciousness is a completely incredible, you have to throw it away. It shouldn't even exist. Never mind being an epiphenomenon. Scientism says that it is an epiphenomenon because they cannot throw it away. You are conscious whether you like it or not. So you got to explain it somehow. But to call it epiphenomenal means that it's not a phenomenon that isn't worth studying, because it's not even a phenomenon. We study phenomena. We are physicists, and consciousness is an epiphenomenon. So we leave it to somebody else, to the philosophers or somebody else to study.
Yeah.
That has been the attitude. Only now there is enough evidence that people begin to say, well, yeah, I mean, we probably, maybe there is something that we have overlooked or something like that. But that's all there is now. There's a little tentation, but we'll see. But the point though is that with the with the incursion of artificial intelligence is essential to understand who we are. Because if we think that we are machines, there will be, and we don't have any, and conscience doesn't do any good, then then the machines of the future will be better than us, because you can always best a machine with another machine.
Yeah.
But if we have something that goes beyond the classical world of machines, then there's a different story. And we are, because we are not the body, and even the body is quantum and classical.
Well, thank you so much for your time, my friend. This is always such a pleasure.
I mean, we can go. I mean, I can go on for as you know, for a long time.
Yes.
But I got to go because I have another engagement. So I appreciate.
Okay. Well, thank you.
It's a good. You got to. It's too long, so you got to cut it.
Okay. No problem. Thank you for doing it.